Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the writer of Hyde Street, Redcoat, and Geiger over at Ghost Machine, which is an imprint of Image Comics. It's Geoff Johns. Thanks for coming on, Geoff.
Thank you, David. Happy Friday, yeah.
Yeah, the day after Halloween. How was Halloween in Los Angeles?
It's always fun in Los Angeles. And there's kind of like two Halloweens. There's the kid Halloween right in the early evening, and then there's the adult Halloween later. So it's always fun.
As I was telling you before we started recording, we got about 1.5 feet of snow this week. So we had 3 trick-or-treaters last night. I'm going to call that a big win.
You better load them up with candy. I hope so.
They got as much as they could handle, to be honest. But how is the day starting for you?
So far, so good. Yeah, it's bright and sunny here in LA.
That's good. Well, it's funny. You've had many hats. Your entire career has been a series of wildly different hats at different times. What is an average day like for you these days?
It's a great question. It's good, first of all. I have worn a lot of hats and continue to, and I love it because I like different things. Like if I got up every day and did the same thing, I get bored. So I really love, from working on multiple books or projects or doing different things like writing or running a business, I love all of it. And I like learning. I like experiencing things. I like, unlike I think a lot of writers, I can sit in a room and write all day, and I often do. But I prefer to interact with people. Like I like collaborating. I love talking to, Brian Hitch about Redcoat for hours on end, or working with Image Comics on, our publishing plan, all sorts of things. But my average day is all very different. Right now, I'd say the only thing that's a constant is I work with the same great people that are part of Ghost Machine. That's kind of my favorite thing, is who I work with. What I work on is, I'm very privileged and lucky to work on things I love. And Ghost Machine's only enhanced that because Brian Hitch and I can work on what we want to work on, which is Redcoat. So the days change. It's a lot of writing every day, but there's other things too, other types of business stuff, creative conversations, brainstorming. But my day starts really, really early because when I wake up, we have a signal chat for everybody on Ghost Machine, as everyone that's part of this knows. And we have people that are around the world. So I wake up and there's messages about, I don't know, croissants, stuff like this. It's not, and half the messages have nothing to do with work because we've all become so close, the 20 plus of us that are part of the company. So my day starts right away. Like I wake up with messages from Brian or Gary or Jason or Ivan or the team, because they're already up and working. And I go to bed very late because I'm usually writing at night because it's quiet. And also, they start to wake up. So it's kind of around the clock work. But again, because I'm working with people I love on stuff I love, it doesn't feel like work. So my days, every day is different, but every day is the whole day.
Is that part of the reason why something like Ghost Machine was appealing to you? Kind of a cooperative environment where everyone is pulling in the same direction and everyone is kind of rooting for each other and like working together and everything like that. Is that part of the reason why Ghost Machine appealed to you so much, is because you like that collaborative environment so much?
Absolutely. I think, working over the years had great experiences, like on things like working on 52 with Grant and Mark and Greg and Steve Wacker and Keith Giffen. Like that was an awesome collaborative effort. Working on Blackest Night, the crossover with Peter Tomasi and our editors and Dan DiDio and all the DC writers and artists that we worked with on that. I always loved the big collaborations because it was fun. It was really fun to get together and work on something where everyone just wanted it to be the best it could be, and we were all pulling in the same direction. And that happened on individual books, like when I'd be working on Green Lantern with Ivan, and Pete was working on Green Lantern Corps with Pat Gleason. It was really fun to have a little collaborative unit to create something, and we talk about the books and the stories, and we were all rooting for each other. And I love that shared experience, because a singular experience to me isn't very rewarding, but a shared experience is what I love. That's like why you like going out to eat with somebody or seeing a movie with somebody. Like it's just the shared experience of life is what I really get invested in. And the solo experience, not so much, because it's fun to experience things with other people, to see other sides of things, get other ideas, other thoughts, other feelings. And so Ghost Machine was an evolution of everything from not just me, but everybody that's a part of it. It started off with like, hey, you know what? We want to have some creative say in the direction, in the ownership, the creation. It really started off with Gary and I going to Image and doing Geiger, and then seeing, wow, that was really that was really fun. It was really rewarding. Let's do it again, because we were going to go back to, Marvel, DC, and do some more work. And then we had so much fun with Geiger, and just being able to say, this is the kind of paper stock we want. We want card stock covers. And they're like, well, they're more expensive. We're like, well, we like them better. Like, as a collector, I like them better. I don't like the paper stock covers. Like, they're just, they don't feel as, I don't know, as nice. And saying, when do you want it to come out? Well, when it's done. That would be good. So we're not late. That would be nice. Gary was really keen on that too. We can schedule our books. We can control it. Like, one of the things I loved about Green Lantern was the collaboration, the opportunity for storytelling, I thought what was untapped potential thus far in Green Lantern when I got to work on it. It's an example, though, of a book where I wrote it for almost a decade. And I remember when I was ending it, I'm like, oh, I've got to write an ending. But also, this is going to continue on and on and on forever. So you can only do, a temporary ending. You can only, characters live and die. I think half the lanterns I created are dead right now. Like, I think the Blue Lanterns are dead. I don't even know, but they'll come back, and things always, they always come back. That's just the nature of what these comics are. And I was I was a complete supporter of it. I think that's what those things are. It's really nice to be on a book like Geiger or Redcoat or Rook and say, this is the version of, you want to read Rook, this is it. This is his story. This is all you're going to have. This is not, version 6 of Rook. This is just Rook. And there's something freeing about, I think, with these stories, like what we have in plan for Geiger, because Gary and I are deep into this book now. He's on issue 12. And what we're doing is really exciting because they matter. The stories we're telling they feel different because we can have things happen and be permanent and know that it's a permanent change for the character, an evolution, a next step. But anyway, all this stuff about, working creatively on something and having more control about things from paper stock to when it ships and have real ownership in it. It started with Geiger, and then it started with conversations with Brian and I about Redcoat, and Jay and I had did 3 Jokers, and he wanted to do something at Image. His dream was always to go to Image because he loves, Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee, and all the original Image artists are his touchstone. And so it did develop into like working with people that you want to work with on things you want to work with and the way you want to work on them. It doesn't mean, I think sometimes people think creative control means, oh, it's my way or nothing. Like, I want to be like the auteur of something. And it's not about not taking notes. I love notes. I work with great editors. Brian Cunningham, our editor-in-chief, was my editor at DC for years. And I always valued every kind of note he gave me. They were always thoughtful, great creative notes. But then on the other hand, there were some people there that would give you bad notes, right? Or give you like, you can't use this character because, there was a thing that happened where I couldn't use the character because they decided to, Dr. Fate, they're like telling me, you got to remove him from JSA because they're going to blow his helmet up. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I wish you would have told me that before I started the story, but that's fine. So I'm going to move him out. And then I wrote him out of the book. And then I said, why does his helmet blow up? Well, we don't know yet. I go, well, what happens to it? Well, we don't know yet. So I was like, okay, well, I'd love some direction. And then ultimately they didn't even do it. And so it's things like that, working in an environment where we had a little more or a lot more all control over just the kinds of conversations, the notes, the where I'm getting feedback from, where I'm giving feedback, with people I respect and trust and value. And that's where Ghost Machine is kind of hits all the spaces, because I love collaboration. I love thoughts. I love notes. I talk to every artist I work with and the editors and the company over and over about my stories and the books, because I love that kind of feedback. But it all developed into, and you hit the nail on the head the first time, as I circle back to your original point, is we're working with people we want to work with.
Yeah.
And that is really it, because when you do that, you can see, if someone takes a glance at, I think probably a Ghost Machine Instagram account, when we were in New York, we had a great time because all of us, we have a yearly summit in New York, and the whole company goes, and all of us really genuinely enjoy spending time with each other. And we have fun, and we're not just talking about comics. That's why our Signal chat with the whole company is like, I love waking up to it and seeing like someone's literally on a beach, like in Copenhagen, or they're drinking coffee in Italy. Like it's really fun to be connected to a group of like-minded, creative, fun, good human beings. Like I think everyone works really, really hard, but we also play really hard too.
Yeah. And you just celebrated 1 year, right? At New York Comic Con?
Yeah, it was a great celebration. It was cool to look back at the 12 months, because when we first came together last year, it was the first time most of us, I'd met everyone, but most of the others were meeting other people for the very first time. There were some people that hardly know anyone. And so when we went into that last year, we're about to announce this company. We're like, a lot of it was like, okay, well, we had a great creative direction we believed in. We had great people with talent, but we didn't have the connective tissue yet of relationships. And I think the thing that came out of that convention last year, which was the most surprising, and you can talk to any of the Ghost Machine crew and they'll feel the same way, was the absolute bonding that happened at that show and during that summit before we announced. So by the time we announced it, it was like this year, it was like going back to summer camp where all your friends are going to be there. Like, oh my God, I get to see Gary Frank and Peter Snaberg and all these people again. And it's so vastly different than I think any of us thought it would be in terms of the personal, emotional connection. But it is more than we could ever hope on that level. And it's more than we could ever hope on the creative level too, because we're really proud of our books. We're really proud of the company. We're really proud of the direction we're going. And we're really grateful that the readers have stepped on board and, and gotten to the books and the characters.
There's two things I wanted to touch on. One comes from a patron of mine, Dennis Hoffman, who's a very big fan of yours. He's going to show up again later on. He specifically complimented the paper stock and the cover stock. And he was just talking about how much he loves that. And as a big production value person myself, I love that you're able to kind of put the value into the book that you want to put into. And another thing that ties into that, I stopped reading comics. It's a very common story. I stopped reading comics in like high school and early college. And the single issue that got me back into buying single issues was Infinite Crisis #4.
A good issue. That's a good issue.
Yeah, I was part of a forum that was talking about comics, and I was reading trade paperbacks at that point, and they were talking about it. And I'm like, this comic seems so wild. I have to check this out. I went to school in Idaho. I got my friend in Spokane, Washington, to drive a copy down to give it to me. I offered him a case of beer in exchange for it, and it got me back into buying single issue comics from then on because I was just so hooked with what I read. But the interesting thing about what you're talking about is like, I love Infinite Crisis. I think Infinite Crisis is a perfectly structured event with all the stuff that came before it. But the thing about it is this isn't me besmirching it whatsoever, because obviously I love it, but it also, because of schedules, had to have multiple artists.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that seems like it's a really big value for you at Ghost Machine is you understand why things like that have to happen. But at Ghost Machine, it seems like one of the big appeals is you don't have to have those things happen.
Yeah, one of the things was scheduling, for example, and this is really granular on like a corporate level, which is, it's what corporations do. And they worry about is the quarter finances, right? Things that our readers don't care about, right? I don't care about it. I just want my book to be great. But, Gary and I were working on Doomsday Clock, and it wasn't going to ship until, I don't know, April of 18. And they moved it up to November because we had finished 2 issues already. We had them in the can. And they said, we're going to move it up to November because we want to have a better quarter, right? So they could get Doomsday Clock 1 and 2 in November, December, and have a better quarter for the year. But what happened is that we lost 6 months of lead time on that book. Gary lost 6 months of lead time. I did. I was super busy, working on Stargirl too. I think around that time, like getting into it, we never would have made a monthly schedule regardless. But it would have been nice to have 6 more months of lead time to get a couple more issues under our belt so that we could be as close to that schedule as possible. So again, some of it is just scheduling. Like we try and plan as best we can. You can't always plan for things like Andrew Hennessy in Florida. We had there's all the hurricanes, right? It's hard to like plan for that kind of stuff.
Right.
So we can miss a week or something, but we really look at our schedule. I just looked at our schedule for the next 2 years through 2026, and we try and plan for everyone's time. Like Gary draws. Gary's a very, very fast artist, generally speaking, for the quality level of his work. But we know he can't draw 12 issues a year. And so we make plans to bring in a guest artist for some issues so we can do that. We can look ahead and really make sure that, hey, we might have a skip month here, but we plan it. We're not saying, oh, this book's not going to come out here. We really want our solicits when they come out to say that our goal is to say like the books come out at this point and then they come out. And we take that super seriously, all of us, because we've all been under the deadlines pressures before. But when things like, Infinite Crisis had multiple artists, like that book was, I remember that book was a dense book. That was a hard book for any artist to draw because of all the characters.
Right.
And bringing in other artists like, wonderful artists, by the way, like George Perez and Ivan Reis and Jerry Ordway was quality work. But we do try and do our best to keep the level of quality at Ghost Machine never a question. Like when you pick up a book from us, it's always going to be on great paper. That's kind of simple, even though it's a lot more expensive for us. Great story, great art, great production values, and it comes out when we solicit it.
From what I read, you were originally actually wanted to draw comics before you got into film. Do you think that that interest and that kind of awareness of art and kind of what it takes to really bring that to life, do you think that that kind of influences your brain and kind of how you look at that side of things and even how you write to some degree?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. When I was really young, I was drawing cartoon strips, and then I started creating I was stacks and stacks of characters. Some of those characters have made it into DC Comics, like Girder. There's a few characters in my Flash run, early Flash run, like Girder and Plunder, who are from that era. And there's other characters in there too that wound up in DC Comics. But yeah, I've always been a very visual person as far as storytelling goes. I love comics, graphic novels, movies, TV. I like images and dialogue, and so I actually sketch out every page that I'm writing. So I have a graph pattern that is like on one 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. I have 6 boxes and they represent a page. And so I will just sketch out kind of what the page will look like. Now the artist will never see that. They'll do their own version, but I like to just look at it and see, okay, this is what the reader is going to see. There are a few great things that I learned early on from probably the most influential writers on me in the very beginning were James Robinson and Jeff Loeb. And I owe a lot to them just for their generosity and writing. And James would always just tell me simple things like page turns, because if you look at a comic book, take the ads out, most of the time, big reveals should happen on pages 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, because you're turning the page. Mm-hmm. If you have Batman about to open a door on page 2, and then page 3 is a splash of the Joker behind that door, well, your eyes see pages 2 and 3 right away. So you already know Joker's behind the door instinctively, even though you're reading the page. He would teach me things like that. And Jeff Loeb would always say, stop and think, would you hang this page on your wall? And if not, maybe there's something better you can do visually with it. So there was a lot of a visual. I always think about the visuals of it all. I was lucky enough to draw one piece of art that was published in Teen Titans Secret Files. I drew a Kid Flash profile because I love that character. But yeah, it informs me. My background or my interest in art informs me quite a bit on how I write comic books.
I do want to say I am one of the rare people probably that has a Geoff Johns original piece of art.
The Thing. Oh, that's a pretty good thing. Yeah, I love The Thing. Oh, awesome.
It was at Emerald City Comic Con 2010, and you had somebody came through with one of those like trucks that has like an entire long box, and they wanted I think Peter and Patrick to sign like basically a whole bunch of comics, and so it stopped the line. And my buddy and he got a Joker from you, and I got The Thing, and I was just like, man, Geoff Johns can draw. Damn.
Thanks, man. Yeah. I want to do a Geiger cover. Actually, I have an idea for one, but I got to find the time for it.
That'd be fun. It's actually kind of I don't want to say it's a trend, but on occasion it does seem like artists or writers have gotten into like, maybe I could do a cover, or maybe I could do like a backup story or something like that. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors in Oni Press. 20 years, 7 evil X's, one huge celebration. Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life was released on August 18, 2004, and for the 20th anniversary, creator Brian Lee O'Malley designed some outstanding new merch. Pre-order is now open on the official Scott Pilgrim 20th Century merchandise line, celebrating 20 years of the iconic Scott Pilgrim series with a selection of brand new and classic designs newly remastered by O'Malley himself. Listeners of Off Panel can use the code SKETCHED15, that's SKTCHD, all caps 15, for 15% off their order of exclusive Scott Pilgrim merch at onipress.com. But hurry, this pre-order closes on December 2nd. And now, back to the show. I do want to talk a little bit about your background before we get back into Ghost Machine, because obviously that impacts a lot of what you've done since. One thing I think is interesting is like you had a very hot start. Like I read Stars and Stripe #1. I'm like, this comic's great. Who is this Geoff Johns person? I have no idea who he is. And it turns out you were completely new. You, from what I understand, basically within 1 year and 1 month in terms of release time, you were on Stars and Stripes, JSA, and The Flash. So you were thrown into the deep end pretty much immediately. What was that like? Were you kind of figuring everything out on the fly?
I was. It's funny because I also wrote Day of Judgment, which was an event. So the first year of comics, the first year I ever wrote in comics, I mean, I didn't know it was weird. I wrote an event, and I loved events growing up. Like I always loved, like I loved Eclipso, The Darkness Within. I loved that event. I loved Crisis on Infinite Earths. So my first comic that got me in, oddly, David, is Crisis 4.
Oh,
Right, of
there we
the
go.
original Crisis. So
Yeah.
and I always feel like issue fours are really good for I always like issue fours of something, because I feel like issue fours where everything's set up now and something happens and then boom, you have that kind of a great moment in issue four. I love issue fours in events because they seem to feel big, the ones that I've read that are longer. But anyway, I love those events. But yeah, my first year was Stars and Stripe, and then I think Flash. And Flash was only supposed to be a single arc.
Oops.
Yeah, well, I would get jobs because no one else would take them. That's what happened back then. Like Flash was my favorite character. And I remember Joey Cavallari, the editor, called me and said, "Hey, do you want to do an arc on the Flash?" And it was shortly after Mark Waid quit. And I loved his run. Everyone loved his run. It was like the greatest run of comics of all time to me. And I was super excited and a little naive. Sure, I'll take an arc after Mark Waid. Sure, why not? And what I found out later is because everyone else said no. Nobody wanted to follow Mark on the Flash. And that's why I got the arc. And they gave me the arc to buy time to find somebody else to take the book over. And I turned in my first script, and like a week later, Joey called me and said, "Hey, do you want to just stay on the book?" I said, "Sure." So when you read my original Flash run, it's interesting because that first arc is it's like
Isolated.
yeah, it's isolated. Angel and Zweta, who did a great job, but it's a different artist, it's just an isolated arc. And I love Captain Cold. I love the Rogues. And Mark hadn't done a lot with them. And so I was like, oh, there's an opportunity there for the Rogues. And so it really was focused on, Wally and Captain Cold. But that's how I got the Flash. And then with Day of Judgment, I remember Mike Carlin called me and said, "Hey, we're going to do," I forget the exact circumstances because it was so long ago now, but he said, "We're going to do a mini series about Hal Jordan returning as the Spectre."
Right.
And he had been a bad guy, been killed, like in Final Night, all this stuff. This was so long ago. And ironic considering I did Rebirth so many years later. But I did, and no one else would do it. No one else would take the story. I didn't know that. I just said, "Oh, that sounds cool." And the one caveat I had, I remember Matt Smith, the artist on it, and I, we loved Blue Devil. And he was dead at the time. And this is when characters were dead. Then when they came back, it actually mattered. It felt big, like it didn't feel like they died and came back so often and got rebooted so often. And so, we were like, "We'll do it if we can bring Blue Devil back." And Mike Carlin he was like, "Oh, okay." Like that's your big ask. That's fine. But yeah, that first year was thrown into the deep end. But I have to say, the reason that, again, I was a little naive and new, so I didn't know that I was thrown into the deep end. But I had a lot of great people around me. I had Chuck Kim, who's my original editor on Stars and Stripe, Mike Carlin, Joey Cavallari, Peter Tomasi, James Robinson, Jeff Loeb. Like I had really good people that I could talk to. I met James when I was at a con in Detroit when I was 19, and he was writing Starman and Firearm. He was doing amazing work. He was so generous with his time, and we became kind of pen pals, essentially. And I got to know him a bit. And with Jeff Loeb, I just met him, I forget, like randomly when I was working for Dick Donner, he came in for a meeting and we started talking. I just started writing comics, and he was so kind and generous and became a very good friend. Another person that in those early days, just because I do so appreciate everybody that was so kind and nice, was Ron Mars. I'll never forget meeting Ron Mars, Todd Knock. Like when I met that first convention I went to when I was doing Stars and Stripe, it wasn't even out yet, and I had books of it, and Todd Knock was so excited and positive, and I'd been a huge fan of his on Young Justice. And Ron Mars was writing Green Lantern at the time, and he came over and was talking to me about the books and give me just encouragement. So yeah, that first year I got thrown into deep end, but I didn't know it. I got to co-write JSA with David Goyer, and that was, learning from him was great.
Yeah.
So yeah, that first year was insane, but and I was still had a day job. I was still working for Dick Donner. I was still his assistant. So the first year and a half, 2 years of writing comics, I still had a day job. So I'd write at night and on the weekends.
It seems like teammates have long been a huge, something that's been really important to you. It's something that's kind of helped you make it through things that even when you don't know what you're doing is like a lot. It seems like having those useful, like those teammates that can really help you figure things out or collaborate with, like with Ghost Machine. It seems like that's always been really important to you.
It is, because I can look at kind of you said many hats, the hats I wore, the chapters that I had in my career. And I can look at, when Dan DiDio came into DC and then it was, Grant and Mark and Greg Rucka, and then Pete Tomasi and Geoff was so great during that time too. Like I've always had and been very lucky to have great friends and colleagues that I've worked with across it all. Like even on Stargirl was, it's funny because people wouldn't know it, but the experience of show running Stargirl, because I was a showrunner, created the show, cast the show, hired the crew, hired the post team, worked with a great writer's room. James Robinson was part of that room, so it came full circle. But that experience of managing a huge budget for that show, managing a 250 crew and having input from cast, Breck and Luke on that show, it was the best experience I've ever had, because I got to build it from the ground up, and it was based back on my love for DC, my very first comic book. Obviously Stargirl, it meant a lot to me personally, but to be able to build something and work with the people I wanted to work with. Like I wrote the script for Luke Wilson. I didn't know him. I just was like, he would be so perfect as Pat Dugan. Wrote the script, sent it to his agent, sent a letter saying, I'd love for him to check this out. He did. We had lunch, we hit it off, and he eventually signed on to the project. And we had a great time in Atlanta for 3 years, working on that show. But that experience gave me that it's possible, right? To build a team that all wants the same thing, that all has talent, passion, and are fun to work with. And Ghost Machine's informed by everything in my entire career, from Dick Donner all the way through Stargirl. That's, and it involves a lot of the people I've worked with for 20 years. A lot of the people I've known for a long time are part of Ghost Machine. And some of the people behind the scenes, people don't even know, like Jamie Erklinos, who's our head of development. He's SVP of development in our company. And our company's very small. It's 20 some people, but out of that 20 some, 16, 17 are creators working on books. And then there's a handful of, business publishing and editorial and development people. And Jamie, I've known him since I worked at Dick Donner's. He worked at Jill Silver's as an assistant, and he went off and did productions for Disney and all sorts of other people. And then he eventually came and he worked at DC years and years later with me. And then he came over to Ghost Machine when I opened that up during Stargirl. So there's people in the company that I've known forever and worked with for a long, long time, because it's always been an important part, but you don't always see that. You just see a name on a cover and TV show comes out, a movie comes out, whatever. You don't always know what the relationships are. But I've always told people in the business, when you find a great collaborator, don't take it for granted. Like I've worked with a lot of artists, and there's a reason I've worked with the same artists over and over and over. Gary Frank, Ivan Reis, Jason Fabuk, Brian and Hitch and I never had the chance to work together, but working on Redcoat, I'm like, yes, this is why we were waiting to it, because this is a book we're supposed to do.
I just have a trio of kind of overarching questions about your career before we get into Ghost Machine. One thing, you've had a lot of collaborations, you've had a lot of collaborators from throughout your career. Is there maybe one or two that you feel you learned the most from, whether it was other writers, artists, editors, or even people outside of comics?
The most from, geez, I don't know if there's the most from. I can name a handful of people that, being older now, one of the oldest people in the company, being older now, and the stories I tell to people, I reference others a lot. I reference Dick Donner all the time. I learned so much from him, and you don't really know how much someone impacts you until it's a while later. But I learned so much from him on storytelling, production, life, management. Some of it which I knew in the moment, some of it which I didn't really know and embrace until much later. He had a huge, huge impact on me. I mentioned Jeff Loeb and James Robinson, huge impact on storytelling. I still teach and tell the lessons of those two to everybody I work with all the time, and I invoke their names all the time. James had such a wonderful way of finding the heart of the story and the reason for being, and the nuances. When he was in the writer's room with me in Stargirl, we would plot so quickly because we want the same thing from the story. We want emotion. We want emotion. We know we want fanfare. We want emotion. And Jeff Loeb always imparted the point. Get to the point. What is it? Celebrate the point. Make it bombastic and fun and interesting and visual and exciting. This is why the medium exists. So I'd say those three off the bat, though there's many, many more people that I've learned from. Working alongside Grant, Greg, and Mark on 52 was amazing. Peter Tomasi, learned a ton from him. He was my editor on Green Lantern, JSA first, and then he became a writer. and obviously he's one of the main writers in Ghost Machine, and a huge part of Ghost Machine. He doesn't just write books. He's a huge part of Ghost Machine. Like everyone in Ghost Machine wears 10 hats. Like that's the company.
I think people forget Peter was an editor, which
They
is
do.
kind of amazing. The funny thing is in that the Thing piece of art, the other side of it is a major bummer. I don't know if you remember that book, but it
I
was
do. It was a great book.
Doug and
Love that book.
Jaron Arcudi, and Peter edited that.
Yeah, he did.
And it's funny. I think people really sleep on just like how well-rounded of a skill set Peter really has. Then on the flip side of the people side, is there a specific project, a specific comics project that you feel like has been particularly instructive in terms of how you approach comics overall?
Yes, Infinite Crisis.
Yeah.
Infinite Crisis. I that was such a hard job. And I also thought, oh my God, this is such a huge, there was no other crisis. There was just one back then, right? There was Crisis on Infinite Earths. That was all there was. And suddenly we were doing a sequel to that, which felt almost forbidden, right? To do the sequel and working on it. It was a massive undertaking. I had done like Day of Judgment, which was a little bit of crossovers, but not a ton. And then I had been involved in like DC's crossovers were pretty straightforward back then. It was like Last Laugh or, where, hey, you have to do a villain that's Jokerized this month or whatever. It was pretty plug and play. It wasn't intricate like Infinite Crisis was, where we had that Countdown to Infinite Crisis. Then we had those 4 miniseries, OMAC Project, Villains United. I mean, Rand Thanagar War. It was a really it was a really huge undertaking. And we had all this buildup. We had hidden characters, reveals. I remember Alan Heinberg and I wrote this Justice League story that built up to it, where Martian Manhunter like got taken out. Like there were so many intricate story details to that book and leading up to that book. And it was hard. It was a really hard book. And there were moments in it that there's tons of moments in it I love. And then there were things in it that I was like, oh, I wish I had more time on the ending or this or that. And so I took all those lessons. I remember Infinite Crisis 7 came out, and it was, I think in retrospect, I really liked the ending. But at the time I was like, it missed the mark for me on certain things. And I was really beating myself up. And I thought, oh, that's the biggest story I'll ever write in comics. And that's it. And I remember they were doing another crossover, and I said, I just want to work on my books. I want to work on Action Comics with Gary Frank, and Justice Society of America with Dale Eaglesham, and Green Lantern with Ivan Reis, Adventure Comics with Francis Manapul.
That was a great book.
Thanks.
It was an underrated book.
We feel the same way. It's one of my very favorite books I've ever worked on, and no one's really knows about it. It's a beautiful book too. It's when Francis changed his full art style.
Yeah.
But I kind of retreated from, and I was doing 52. So I did Action Comics with Gary Frank, 52, Green Lantern with Ivan Reis, building it to Sinestro Corps, Dale Eagleham's run, the second run in Justice Society of America, which I'm really proud of. I had probably the greatest analysis that year, because I went back and I would work so hard to really learn from my own mistakes, my own, what I saw as my own failings as a writer, my own places I could find improvement. And one of the things was endings. I'm like, I want to write a great ending to a big story. And I remember when I was working on Sinestro Corps, I did the one shot. I'm like, I think this is going to work really well. And then we were working on Sinestro Corps, and the ending was approaching, Green Lantern 25. And I was like, oh my God, this has to be good. And one of my best friends, Tom Root, he's one of the head writers of Robot Chicken. And he and we went to Vegas. He was working on a screenplay, and I was working on Green Lantern 25. We went to Vegas for like a week. Didn't drink or anything, but what we would do is we rented this 2-bedroom suite. He would write a script, and I would write Green Lantern 25 all day long at the Palms. And we write it all day long, and I just sat there agonizing over every detail, wanting everything to pay off, wanting it to feel epic and beautiful and emotional, and then at night we'd go play craps and we'd and have dinner, and then we wouldn't drink. Then we come back the next day, we'd repeat it. We did that for like a week, and I spent every agonizing daylight minute writing that book. And I remember I was writing the scene where Hal goes to, I loved it. Hal goes to Coast City, and he goes to Coast City, tells his brother, you need to leave. Sinestro Corps is coming. And his brother's like, we're not going anywhere because you're here. You're going to take care of this. And Hal started to see that people had faith in him again. And then ultimately it led to this battle where, because I always was like, people were so violent about the Hal versus Kyle lanterns back then. And I just never understood it, because I'm like, the whole point of lanterns are supposed to be a bunch of them. And I really wanted to cap this off with to show the bravery and courage of Hal and Kyle versus Sinestro as they're battling through Coast City, and the rings are dead. and they're jumping through buildings like that are under construction because Coast City was still being built by then. And anyway, I was working on that script, and for me, I finished it, and it was like, then it was like, you know, peak at Blackest Night, and the announcement of Blackest Night, and like, because no one knew Blackest Night was coming until that book. And so Green Lantern 25, I finished. It was a giant issue, and I begged Dan to do. I'm like, please don't have anyone else draw pages, please, because they were always saying we're going to have more. It was the big book was big. They constantly said, as you said, we have to have someone come in and draw 6 pages, and it always just, it never made the book better. It always made it worse because you want the consistency, you want that quality level. And we got to a place where no one really remembers Green Lantern 25 shipped a week late.
Yeah, but they remember it being awesome.
Yeah, but it was awesome, right? And I remember the epilogue to it came out before, right? Like the they wouldn't hold the book for a week, and I was really upset by it, but it didn't matter. But those are kind of the choices, by the way, in Ghost Machine we can make. But the book came out, Green Lantern 25, still one of the books, and there's a lot of books that, you know, I know I could have done better, or I wish I'd done better. But that book, Green Lantern 25, is one of the books I'm the most proud of, and I really did pour blood, sweat, and tears, and a lot of angst and a lot of effort in making that a good conclusion to a story, because they're hard, but it worked. And I still love that book. And Ivan drew every single page he was supposed to draw. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book. But that, from Infinite Crisis to Sinestro Corps, that period was a huge learning period, because I think, you know, I could have gone online and been like, oh, there's editorial interference in this and that, blah, blah. I always thought it was like up to me to learn from myself. It's like, look at my own work. If it didn't work, why? What did I do wrong? What did I mess up? You know, and I continue to do that. Like, what can I improve upon? What can I work on? And you know, Ghost Machine's an opportunity for that, only because it's different now. It's different than superheroes.
Yeah.
You know, so I can continue to push myself. Well, I'm working on a horror book. I'm working on an adventure book about a freaking red coat British soldier. Like, you know, that's wild. It's not something I ever would have thought I would have tackled, but yet here I am and having a blast with it. So again, long-winded answer, but Infinite Crisis was the book I learned the most on. Sinestro Corps was the book I learned the most on too, because from that period, like year and a half period between both, and then into Blackest Night, I tried to apply everything I learned on Infinite Crisis and Sinestro Corps into Blackest Night. I moved to New York for 3-4 months, and I literally every day take the subway into the office. They gave me an office there. I'd write Blackest Night. I'd work with the editors. I'd work with the writers to try and make that as clean as a process as a crossover could be. People had scripts. They knew what was happening, very clear direction, very clear sandbox to play in, so that there was minimal frustrations, minimal friction in that. And I did the same thing with Infinite Crisis too. I moved to New York for 2-3 months from LA, and got an apartment and just would go in every day and plot things. There was something that was interesting. There was there was supposed to be a 5th miniseries originally. Amazon's Attack was going to be a miniseries during Infinite Crisis. And I remember that it came in, and the pitch came in, and I went to Dan, and Dan was great about this too. I said, it's just not good enough. It's not hitting the mark. This is not the right thing. And he said to me, like, no, let's not do it. I said, great. So we didn't do it. But that was cool that we could have those conversations because we were in person. And I think a lot of the collaboration has to happen in person. Zoom helps a lot nowadays, but back then it was important. But anyway, those are some big periods. And there's a lot of other books I've learned a lot on. Like, and I would apply everything I could to it. I applied everything I learned from comics up to DC Universe Rebirth. That one shot, love that one shot. Wally West is my favorite character, and I was like, I got a chance to bring him back, and that book was like a reminder of why the DC Universe to me was so and is so wonderful. It's that heartbeat, right? That heartbeat and that continued legacy and the characters' relationships and bringing that back and trying to just remind people why it was important, why it worked. But there's so many. I mean, I can go on and on because I've learned on so many projects. On 3 Jokers, I've learned a ton on working with Jay on that. You know, all sorts of things. Doomsday Clock, huge undertaking. Like, just all those projects were big. But then I learned a lot working on Adventure Comics. Booster Gold, learned a ton on Booster Gold.
See, I do want to say really quick, you are underlining one of my favorite parts about your career is, like, you kind of emphasize this. You talked about you want to bring Blue Devil back, and you talked about how you were the one who was willing to, like, follow Mark Waid and Booster Gold and things like that. One thing I've always liked about you is you kind of, I don't know what the right way to phrase this is, but you seem to, like, see something in characters that are underused, or maybe, like, people don't want to touch for one reason or another. And you're like, I think there could be something we could do here. And, like, that's always really appealed to me about your stuff.
I 100% think that, and I believe that. I mean, they used to always try and get me to write Batman all the time, and I was like, guys, Batman doesn't need me. Batman's already cool. Batman's got 1,000 great stories. Batman was almost too. It was almost like low hanging fruit and it just didn't need the love because Batman's already works, and there's so many people that can do great Batman stories. What I always loved was taking characters, and look, I remember I was like, I want to write Booster Gold, and they were like, you're crazy.
I loved your Booster Gold book.
I loved it too. It was super fun, and it did really well. And I remember when Ivan and I wanted to jump on Aquaman, and we were told, "Why are you wasting your time on?" Oh, when I did Teen Titans, I was told it's going to be canceled in a year. I remember Mike McCone and I were doing Teen Titans. We told someone, a big artist, and the artist said, "Why are you doing that? It's going to be canceled in a year." And so there was something almost when someone says that, it's almost like when someone says to a kid, don't touch your food. You want to touch it. So when they would say like, "Don't Teen Titans to be canceled in the year," I was like, F this, right? This is gonna I'm gonna make this book as good as I can make it. And so was Mike. And that was always a part of my career though, was like, and also like Hawkman, people are like, "Oh, he's too broken." I'm like, he's not too broken. Hawkman's a great character. You just have to figure out why emotionally, why is he interesting and unique? One of the things I've always tried to do is if I could take Booster Gold out of a story and plug Hawkman into it or plug Aquaman into it, and it's the same story, it's not a good story.
Right.
It has to be a Booster Gold story. The only story we could tell about Booster Gold was, hey, look, you have to go down in history as a complete moron, but actually do great stuff so that no one's trying to erase you from existence. And Booster Gold learns to take on that responsibility of having to pretend he's an idiot to everybody, even though he's now sacrificing everything he has to be a great hero, including his reputation, which was the most important thing to him. It becomes a compelling character. Like, what a great character.
And you have Skeets to always judge him, which is great.
Yes. Also, yeah, Skeet's always there. But also, I love giving him the gift that there's one person that knows he's not an idiot. It's Batman.
Yeah.
Right? And Batman says, I know. I know. And that helps Booster get through it. That at least the one guy who doesn't respect anybody really looks at Booster Gold and says, I know what a hero you are. And so finding those individual, unique spaces, emotional spaces for these characters and making sure their stories are reflective of that struggle or that kind of heartbeat, that to me was always super interesting. But honestly, like I would flip through who's who. You could give me any character and I could, if you said, Geoff, you got to figure out a monthly book for character X, I would love doing that. I would always say, give me the worst characters.
Android Arrowman from Tom Payer and Rags Morales' run. I love that book.
Oh, great character. That book's already good. He's not a broken character.
I know, but nobody uses him anymore. But
yeah, you're right. No one uses him. He's a great character. We used him briefly in Stargirl Lost Children.
We got to get to Ghost Machine, though. I do think one thing that's a commonality here, though, amongst all the characters you're talking about is a perceived high degree of difficulty. You shouldn't do this because it's not going to last a year or this or that.
David, it was always sales. Right? Everyone's always like, oh, the Brass Rings Batman, the Brass Rings Justice League. Like that's because the X-Men, because those books sell. They automatically sell. So you're going to be on a hot book. And I was like, well, make Green Lantern a hot book, make Aquaman a hot book, make Teen Titans a hot book, make those characters that aren't hot, make those characters work, make people see what you love in those characters. That to me is a real challenge when it comes to these long-standing characters. And so many now have been through constant reboots and had highs, but there's still so much potential in these characters that have kind of been forgotten or tossed aside or just used as cannon fodder. I think any character out there, if you have the right take and you have something to say, you can make that character work like gangbusters. And people have proven it all over the place. Like look at Grant. Grant was a huge inspiration because Grant did that with Animal Man and Doom Patrol.
Yeah. And
John Ostrander did that with Suicide Squad and all those characters in there. My inspiration came from a lot of that. Alan Moore did it with Swamp Thing and so many others. He wrote a couple vigilante stories that were just insane. Like there's so much potential in all these characters. You just have to, if you have something to say and you can find a way in to make it universal for everybody and exciting and new. That's the magic of it all.
I think the thing that's interesting about Ghost Machine though is like in a similar way, it's like you're doing something that a lot of people think that you maybe shouldn't or couldn't do in this moment, in the sense that it's a whole bunch of original ideas. It's something that nobody's really done. And I mean, I guess the closest comp is like Image 1992 itself, where a bunch of creators go and form a collective and do something new across shared universes. But for listeners that don't know, Ghost Machine is an imprint image, but it's also a collective of creators like Geoff, Brad Meltzer, Peter Tomasi, Gary Frank, Yvonne Reese, and more. And the idea is all of its founding creators are exclusive to the company and jointly own, operate, and profit from their creations, making it, as Ghost Machine #1 itself said, the first fully shared creator-owned universes. And it's not just comics, it's media, merchandise, and beyond. I think the thing that's interesting about it, though, is like that is kind of, in a weird way, like it's kind of like a utopian idea for creator rights. It's like something that hasn't been done. But the thing is like, it's kind of similar with like what you were saying with like Teen Titans and with like the Flash and all these different characters. It's like, it hasn't been done, but that doesn't mean it's possible. Why was doing something like that with all these people you've worked with before and all these people you have relationships with, why was that something that you wanted to try and build?
Well, it came from all the experiences we've had. It's like, okay, we know what we really like, what great environment it is to create stuff. We've been through it. We've had, really great high points. Then we've also had challenges and difficulties, and what we think are perceived obstacles or things that, one of the things you learn quickly in the big companies is that decisions aren't always made because they're the right decision or they're the best decision for the end reader. Right. The end goal is like create great content and great characters. But one of the things that we looked at, and it took us years to build Ghost Machine, like the fact that it was kept secret for so long. And when we announced it, it was like, wow, no one leaked it. Like it was because it was so tight knit.
Was it happening before Geiger came out, the first issue?
No, when Geiger came out, because we had set up Geiger at Image Comics before Doomsday Clock even finished. Because Gary was like, I want to do something else. And Eric Stevenson and I had been talking a long time. And so we came up with the concept of Geiger and we pitched it to Image. We had started working on that as we wrapped up Doomsday Clock. Then came out, like, we announced it like, I don't know, a year later, and then it came out. But when Geiger came out, I was working on Stargirl. It was the end of, I think I was starting season 3. And we started just talking about the idea of like, how could we make a new kind of comic book company, a creator-owned comic book company that was truly creator-owned? Because Image Comics, like, there's publishers out there that say they're creator-owned comics, but they're not creator-owned comics, right? They feel like creator-owned. Oh, look, independent creator-owned comics. They're not creator-owned comics. They own and control the media rights to all these comics they're doing, or they have a big piece of it with the creators, but they control it. Like, there's no mistake about that. Like their Image Comics is the only place that's 100% creator-owned and creator-controlled. That it is the only publisher out there that's what they do. The fact that's not talked about more is a little bit surprising to me, because we did a lot of research, obviously, on all these companies, and most of them control media rights and share it with the creators, but they're the ones in control. One of my good friends, a creator, wrote this great original creator-owned book for one of the companies, and they control the media rights, and they set it up as, I don't know, a TV show somewhere, and he just gets informed on it, and it's his book, and he's a TV writer. It's like he wants to write on the TV show, and they're like, well, hopefully it'll work out. I don't know how that's okay, but that's the deal. Those are the deals that are out there, and it's hard to do this stuff. It really is. You got to pay your mortgage and your rent, and you got to make a living. But Image was the only truly creator-owned company out there where creators capture as much as they can and share it with Image, of course, but capture and control it. And they have a great team there, and they're founded by it. Like those 7 artists broke away from the big companies and did this. They created this where they could own their own characters. Now, we looked at it, we're a little later in our careers than they were. When we all looked at it, we said, well, how can we take what they did and take it a step further in today's world? And we ultimately came to the conclusion, and the business plan and everything was that let's co-own everything, right? Respect each other's creations, but co-own everything and share in everything and work collaboratively. And everyone here is such a good, talented, prolific person. They're self-starters, meaning that you don't have to, I always hated, like, when I had an office job, like having to be there at 9. They're like, look, I'm working at 7 a.m. They're like, well, you got to be in the office at 9, but I'm working at 7 a.m. Like, I always felt like self-starters, you don't have to check if they're working. That shouldn't even be a question. Like, why are people worried about if someone's working or not? Everyone that's a self-starter works, and everyone that's a part of Ghost Machine is a self-starter. They're passionate. You almost have to slow them down. So we built Ghost Machine over years. I mean, it took 2 years to really look at be smart about the business model, the business plan, be smart about the creative, be smart about, what we could do. And we knew some people would think it was crazy.
New always is.
Yeah, it always is. And yet at the same time, it's a little bit like Sinestro Core. When I did that, they're like, I can't believe Sinestro never had his own core. I heard that from so many people. I can't believe Sinestro never had his own core. And I was like, yeah, it's a simple idea that should have been done. And then you look at Ghost Machine. Yeah, it's a simple idea that should have been done. It's not that complicated. A bunch of A-list creators get together who have a lot of experience and want to create new things and build a company to create new things. And they control and, they operate it and own it. And operate's are really a key word there.
Yeah.
To operate and own it. And we're really sensitive to making sure that every reader and comic book retailer and person out there is getting high quality stuff delivered to them and that it's worth their hard earned money. We're not putting out too many books, or we're being very carefully about rolling out our series. We take it all incredibly seriously, though we have a lot of fun doing it, but it's all very meticulous. We all bring experiences from all sorts of different parts of the business and life into it and globally. Because although we have a base in LA with about, 5 or 6 people that actually are in an office, we go to Ghost Machine office every day. Most of our people are global across the world. Brian's in London, Gary's in Italy, Jay and Francis are over in Ontario and Toronto, Peter Steinberg's in Copenhagen, Ivan's in Brazil. Like we've got people all over the world, and the different perspectives and collaboration is what makes Ghost Machine working. But yeah, people thought it was a little bit crazy, right? And when we first announced it, it was like, wait, what is this? That's why going from last year's New York Comic Con to this year's was so different. Because last year, we announced it. We have a ash can of Ghost Machine 1 ready. We have our booth. People were just saying, what is this? What is this? This year, we had lines all day, every day. And we thought, we'll probably sign, hopefully we'll sign 50%, Ghost Machine and 50% Marvel DC stuff we've done. It was 90-10. And that to us was awesome. Like that so many people were talking about the stories and the characters. And I think one of the things that was really inspiring for us is that the originals Image lineup was, these great A-list creators introducing new characters and stories. And that's what we want to, continue, but really a focus on ongoing series and ongoing characters and having them be, I don't know, as good as we can make them. That's all we really want to do. We want to make great ongoing books and great series.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is where some of the biggest names in comics are crowdfunding. Live campaigns this month include The Art of Dave Dorman, Camille DeErico's Paroby art book with Megaton Man Omnibus from Fantagraphics and Don Simpson, Molds from Steve McGarry and Rick Stromowski, and more. More campaigns are coming soon to Zoop from Joe Quesada, Alex Segura, Michael Marisi, Dean Kotz, as well as the relaunch of Hack Slash the card game on Zoop's partner platform, GameFound. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge more creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. What you were talking about kind of reminds me of, I did this feature on the 25th anniversary of Image where I talked to the founders and wrote a big piece for The Ringer about it. And I remember Todd McFarlane told me something along the lines of when he and Rob Liefeld and Jim Lee were leaving Marvel after saying that they were departing, Tom DeFalco walked them to the elevator and he said, "You're always welcome back here if it falls," or basically if it falls apart. And Todd was just he was kind of incensed, if I remember correctly. And apologies if I'm paraphrasing my own article incorrectly, but basically he said he thought we were going to fail because it was so different. And I think that sometimes people have a hard time wrapping themselves around the idea of something new, especially in comics where things are often quite similar for a very long time. But I don't know. I mean, all you can do is do your best you can. I think one of the big things you have is not only do you have great names, but you also have prolific creators. I'm pretty sure Brian has drawn a page while I've been talking because he's so fast.
Yeah.
How did that group come together?
The group came together really organically. It's Gary and I have been working together for over 20 years, not consistently, and developed an amazing relationship. And Jay and I have been working together, I think, almost a decade now. And Ivan and I, we worked together for a long, long time. And then
was Infinite Crisis the first book you guys worked on?
No, we worked on Vision over at Marvel and Avengers.
Oh, dang. One of your 2 Marvel books.
It's funny because Gary and I also, for the first time, worked on Avengers.
Wow.
Ivan and Gary and I all worked, our first books were Marvel books. Avengers. Wow. People forget I was at Marvel for a minute. And so we worked on those, but it came together organically. Again, Jason and I we're working on Batman 3 Jokers. We were going to do another DC thing. And Jay for a lot of different reasons, was kind of fed up and wanted to go to Image, which was his dream. He saw Gary and I at Image, and Brian and I were talking. Brian was doing stuff at Marvel, but he was feeling stagnant, as he has admitted a lot in interviews, and wanted to do something new. And Redcoat was born out of our desire to work together. And it's just such a fun book to work on. I just finished another issue this morning already, but I love that book. It's so fun to work on. But it all grew organically because we started doing these books. And I'm like, well, it was myself, Gary, Brian, and Jay first talking about this. We first had our Zooms together. We're talking about this. And then there were other folks that got involved. We started talking about, Francis and Peter and Stayberg and Brad and Natal and Lamont and Mike Cotton, who's our, head of publishing, and Brian Cunningham was our editor-in-chief. And a lot of people we've worked with over the years came into the company, and eventually it just grew organically into Ghost Machine. And Ivan's contract was coming up. It took a good 2 years for us to really get to a place where I know we were like, we're going to announce it at New York Comic Con, we're ready. And everybody was really nervous about it because we were just starting. We got some books done. We had some book issues done and stuff. But I got to say, a year later, we all looked back at it at the summit a couple of weeks ago now in New York. It was pretty amazing because, sometimes you work on something, there's so much work involved. It takes longer than you think. And then you get there and you look back at it and go, wow, that was a lot of work. We're all so happy and grateful and excited. I think more excited now. Oh, Rob Lee, amazing letterer. I've worked with him forever. But I was like, look, Rob Lee's the greatest letterer in comics. And we would work on books and he'd be like, oh, I'm working on this or that. And it's like, Rob is like, he's the greatest letterer in comics. How can he not be locked up at somewhere? I'm like, well, come be, not only be part of the company, own part of the company.
Yeah.
Like, he's the best letterer in the business. Come own the part of the company. Same with Brad Anderson and his colors. Brad was coloring all our stuff and Brad was busy working on this or that. It's like, come over and be a part of Ghost Machine. Own Ghost Machine with us. Operate it with us. Help our colors be the best they can be across the board, even when you can't color every book because Brad can only do so much. And then they also bring their experience. Rob has a ton of experience in everything else. He's worked in production and toys, and Brad's coloring is, I call him the master of light because it's just unmatched. But to have talent on every single level, be part of Ghost Machine, that was the key, is bringing in just super cool, talented people. And we continue to do that with Danny Ward, who's new. She's joined the team recently. She's in our marketing, awesome person, connected with retailers. She's great. But our entire company is built of people who, I have to say this, the most important thing our company does is we see and celebrate the value people have.
Mm-hmm.
We see and celebrate the value. I think too often in companies, people don't really see the value in people. You talk about how I see value in Booster Gold or, Mara, or characters that are kind of thrown to the side. That's what we do with real people, is we unlock them, allow them to be unlocked, allow them to come to a place where we are going to say, we see you, we see what you do, we celebrate what you do it. How can we help you do it best? How can we help you have fun? And everyone plugs right in and then does it and becomes a real operator in the company, because there's no level. We were in the room. There's nobody outside this room that can say, anything about what we do. There's nobody that can say you can't create Redcoat. There's also we're not worried about what's the next corporate takeover that's going to change the entire structure of the company.
That'd be quite the twist.
Yeah, you hear about these corporate takeovers and everyone worries about, am I still going to get a Batman or X-Men comic book? That's how it came together. It came together because all of us wanted to create a place for everybody to do our best work and have fun doing it and get it to all the readers who would enjoy it and make it the best it could possibly be. And then also create an environment and a culture in the company that values people, that values what they do, that is about, it's not just plugging people into job positions. It's about really unlocking their potential, like we've done with characters that need it.
You mentioned them already. I'm a very specific type of nerd who looks at things in a very specific way. That's always like, a lot of times people are like, really? That's the thing you took note of? My thing is when Brad Anderson, colors Brad Anderson, and letterer Rob Lee were signed to exclusives, that was the moment where I was like, Ghost Machine's really interesting.
David, let me correct you there. They're not exclusives. They're owners of the company.
Yeah, they're owners of the company.
Yeah.
And the thing that's interesting about that is, you mentioned before, there's a lot of companies that are not really creator owned. And there's a lot of companies that are comic companies, but they're kind of more like media curious companies, to put it in one way. And the thing that's interesting is making a colorist and a letterer owners of your company indicates that you are first and foremost a comic company. And I like that a lot.
Well, I mean, the whole point of this is doing characters, right? Is doing ongoing series. We're not doing like, oh, let's do a 4-issue miniseries about, the crooked road off the street or whatever it is. That's an old TV pitch,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like these are books. These are what they are. Things will happen. Like will have like Junkyard Joe has a toy. That's cool. That was very organic though. We didn't set out to do it. It just kind of occurred with us in a relationship with Mezco. And we'll have other things that are developing, but our goal is just to create great stories and great characters. And to do that, you need the best creators in the business. And I think we have the best. But it is, when you look at the landscape, there are too many, and it will contract at some point. There are too many publishers that are simply editorial constructs. They're just editors. They're editors looking to grab creators' ideas and then go develop media with them and try and get a TV show made or whatever. And they're very transactional. And I don't think you can create great comic books if you're not focused on creating great comic books. And that's what your goal is. You got to do that first.
So I just have a couple more questions. When it comes to Ghost Machine in specific, one of the things I think is really interesting about these books is we've never really seen what you're like when you're creator owned. We've never really seen what Yvonne's like when he's creator owned. We've never seen like, what would you guys do if you did like Hyde Street, which is, I would not have put that in my top like 100 ideas that I would have seen you two doing. And yet it works. Geiger, it works. Not something I would have expected. When it comes to not finally, but like doing the things that you're like able to do without supervision, without governance of what you can or cannot do, what drives you in kind of putting those ideas together?
Well, everything comes from somewhere. So in the case of Geiger, it came from being a father and how protective you can get, how you can kind of almost misthink your role is just being protective, because there's so many things in the world you worry about in a different way. And with Geiger, it grew out of that worry of how do you protect your family? How do you from the world, and taking it to the extreme. And I was always struck by the kind of the strong emotions of love for a child, and then also the willingness to kind of do anything to protect that child. And I was like, what would I do to protect my kid? Quite a bit, and maybe losing yourself in that. And Geiger, to me, became it's a book about a man who cares so much, and then also unleashes a fury on the other end of that. He can be so loving and so destructive at the same time, and trying to reconcile that within somebody who's crossed the line so many times they don't even know where the line is anymore. That to me is the story of a monster trying to find the man inside him. Again, it's just a great story, and Gary and I always love things like the Hulk and Mad Max, and Geiger to us is that exploration of that. So it came from something real. It came from something we wanted to explore as human beings. In terms of Redcoat, like that thing, it was so funny because Redcoat became a much funnier title than I think Brian and I ever thought it would be. And a lot of that humor became because Brian and I just, when we hang out, we just have a great grand old time. We laugh consistently and endlessly about just hanging out, being with each other. The Redcoat came out of us talking about, life. And Brian was saying how he just keeps repeating the same mistakes. He's like really good at that. And we just talked about how long would it take to like really learn to become a better person? Like if you live 200 years, could you become a better person? Like how long does it take for a human being to become like really good? And we said, well, let's find out, right? Let's take the most undeserving of all people to be immortal. Who would that be? Well, it'd be a British colonist, right? A redcoat soldier. And the story developed from there, and just finding out how hard is it to change as a human being. Let's see. And what does it take? Well, it takes other people. It takes other people to show you different ways, different things and experiences. And that's what our journey with Simon is. It's exploring the long, long life we all have, and the effects that the people and events have on us. And what can we do to make it through it and evolve and grow? And it continued with Rook, with nature, and Hyde Street, about choices you make and how they haunt you. Small choices, right? Maybe you take a parking ticket off your car and put it on somebody else's. Does that affect anything? Maybe it does. Maybe it ruins someone else's life. Maybe you don't know that. And so we're exploring things that come from life through the wonderful medium of comic books and using the same storytelling, I guess styles that we did on Marvel and DC. They're very, emotional and I think relatable and big and fun, but they're coming from a very real place of exploration, emotional exploration, life exploration, but all that fun stuff. And then with High Street, like I love Twilight Zone, I love Tales from the Crypt, I love the Universal Monsters, I grew up on all that stuff. Whenever I was sick, I'd watch Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein or Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or I'd watch Twilight Zone endlessly. I remember coming back from work late, summer job late at night, and HBO would just play Tales from the Crypt, and I'd watch it all the time. I read those old comics. So a lot of things, there's the emotional kind of core, and then there's like the fun, genre core that I've always loved horror stuff. I've never really had a chance to explore it. When I was, I think 10, I was Frankenstein for Halloween. I remember my mom helped me make this paper mache flat top. I have this book called Movie Monsters, this old book. I'd had instructions how to do it. My brother was the Wolfman. It was such a cool memory for me, and I never really got to explore that classic horror side of it, of strange horror characters. There's one coming up called The Matinee Monster that takes center stage in Hyde Street #4. I love the story. I can't wait for people to read it, but it's those kind of things that I get to tap into that I never had the chance to before. And that's why I think all of us across the board are feeling so energized, because there's so much left to do. There's so much left to say. There's so much more to explore. And although it feels familiar, and it should, it's still brand new. And that's something magical. Like, I don't know how it feels so familiar. Like I slip into an issue of Hyde Street and I feel like I've been writing that book for years.
I love how energized you are by this. To be honest, I'm energized about it. Just listen to you talk about it. But Geoff, that is actually all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about Ghost Machine, your career, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
An absolute pleasure. Thanks for everybody who's listening and checking out our books. And if you haven't, please give them a try. We really are putting everything we have into these, and we really believe in these books. And this is it for the long term for us. Like Ghost Machine is, you talk about chapters in a life, and Ghost Machine is our chapter. It's chapter for the rest of our lives.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Geoff Johns. You can find his work in Hyde Street, Geiger, and Redcoat, all of which are published at Ghost Machine, an imprint of Image Comics. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. On even more, subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me on Blue Sky. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Brian, David Byrne, Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polkes, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hull, Near Levy, Jason Hussa, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tyne IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Petra Coyle, Isaac Oren, Klaus Vandeven, Submed Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillos, Patrick Brower, Declan Shelby, Dan Carino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Liana Kingus, Nick Bennett, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiampang, Andrew Carita, Stephen Hull, Philip Myra, Chris Pachalo, Torin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Ta, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Assey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Debenakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.